Hi, my name is Derek. Today I want to talk about content moderation in social media and how the structure of our social networks impacts our experiences. Specifically, I want to argue that decentralized social networks may be best suited to addressing the problems users face with hateful content online. This matters because as the world grows in connectivity and so many of our interactions take place in online spaces, we need to be able to govern these spaces effectively. The structure, that is, the rules and tools that we give to our online spaces and by which we govern them, has a lot to do with our well-being as a people and the quality of the interactions that we have on a daily basis. This presentation is the result of the research and interviews I conducted over the course of several months in early 2020. In that time, I spoke with 80 people, primarily on Mastodon, including 12 interviews of social network administrators and moderators, as well as hate speech monitors and experts in dangerous speech. I also conducted a survey of Mastodon users with 670-odd respondents. So let's get into it. The big social networks of our time have a problem. The goal of companies like Facebook and Twitter is to grow as large as possible, creating a global community, interacting with each other in harmony, sharing stories, posting news, liking each other's content, and cheerfully clicking on ads. Twitter measures its user base in the hundreds of millions, Facebook in the billions. Their success in growth, however, has presented these social media companies with real challenges in content moderation, challenges that are fundamentally difficult to address due to their structure. Despite having banned white nationalism and white separatism and taking halting steps to limit dangerous speech at a policy level, centralized social media has difficulty enforcing its policies. Right-wing extremists continue to maintain a public presence on these sites. Hateful, abusive content is left online indefinitely, despite user reporting, and attempts to use AI to support moderation efforts are woefully insufficient. While there's plenty of room to critique social media companies, the problems they face may be structural. Mike Masnick, a technology researcher and the editor of TechDirt, says that content moderation at scale is impossible to do well. First, says Masnick, moderation is likely to anger whoever is moderated, and the more people you have in a social network, the more types of differing views, mindsets, and perspectives that will need to be addressed and could come into conflict. Second, content moderation is inherently subjective, relying on judgment calls in gray areas that are bound to be questioned. And third, scale is an issue. Getting 99.9% of content moderation decisions at an acceptable level probably works fine for situations when you're dealing with 1,000 moderation decisions per day, but large platforms are dealing with way more than that. On Facebook alone, a recent report noted that there are 350 million photos uploaded every single day. That's just photos. If there's a 99.9% accuracy rate, it's still going to make mistakes on 350,000 images every single day. So, content moderation in centralized social networks is hard. What about decentralized social networks? One of the most prominent decentralized social networks today is the Fediverse, a network of social networks using a shared, open protocol called ActivityPub to communicate. ActivityPub drives a suite of alternatives to the well-known and familiar services that drive the daily internet. PeerTube is a free and decentralized alternative to the video hosting platforms like YouTube and Vimeo. PixelFed seeks to act as a stand-in for the image-based social networks like Instagram. Write Freely plays the same role as Medium. Nextcloud replicates Google Drive. The largest and most active of ActivityPub-based services is Mastodon, a Twitter-like social network. Together, these and other services form a federated universe of social networks. Each of these applications employs the ActivityPub protocol to communicate, so that, for example, users of a Mastodon and PeerTube instance could view comments from the other instance. With 4.4 million users, Mastodon is the largest and most established of these networks, and is replete with servers, called instances, that focus on different topics and communities. As the Fediverse grows, it would be natural to assume that it would be beset by the same challenges that centralized social networks faced. In June of 2019, a worried developer began a conversation about white supremacists. GitHub user Lorelei voiced a concern that had saturated her community for weeks, ever since Gab, a far-right social network known as a safe haven for neo-Nazis and white supremacists, had announced its intention to launch a new platform. Gab was descending on the Fediverse. For an open network, the migration of Gab was a big deal. Prior to Robert Bowers killing 11 people in a Pittsburgh synagogue in 2018, he had been a frequent user of Gab. He had been in a space that glorified hatred, was replete with anti-Semitism, and was surrounded by a community that supported violence against Jews, among other ethnic groups. When a poster on Gab asked, "Do you support the Pittsburgh synagogue shooter, Robert Bowers?" nearly 25% of respondents said that they did. One poster replied, "Robert Bowers literally did nothing wrong." Back on GitHub, Lorelei was arguing that the Fediverse had to respond now. "Not to put too fine a point on it, but we have about a month before the monsters come," she said, pointing to a July start date of the new server. Quote, "When I first started getting into Mastodon, I tried to tell people that these types would show up eventually, and got laughed at and ridiculed for it. Now the barbarians are at the gates, and we are not ready, and a lot of people just want to let them in. If we aren't prepared, these fascists will overrun and destroy our communities." The Fediverse was soon put to the test. Within a day of launching, Gab had swollen to become the largest node in the Fediverse, reportedly more than doubling the size of the next largest server. The worst had happened. The trolls had deposited themselves in the new frontier. How does the structure of the Fediverse impact the issue of content moderation and bad actors? In my research, I found a number of qualities to the Fediverse that users and administrators pointed at that helped them address the issue. Codes of conduct at the instance level, moderation by humans, and an effective set of moderation tools. Codes of conduct. Codes of conduct are rules of behavior that govern a particular instance within the Fediverse. By being a member of an instance, a user is required to adhere to that instance's rule set. In a decentralized network, this means that many different instances can have many different codes of conduct, and have to navigate situations where users of two different instances are governed by different rules. Kodo.org, an instance for, quote, "scholars in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and all yearning to learn," enacts relatively few regulations on member behavior. "We are a free speech, no censorship zone," says the instance's About page. "Feel free to talk about whatever you want, say whatever you want. As long as it is legal and you engage respectfully, you won't ever get banned from the server." On the other end of the spectrum is an instance like Mastodon.technology, which maintains a long list of rules. The policies are intentionally broad. No racism, no sexism, says the rule list. No discrimination based on gender, sexual minority, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, ethnicity, religion or lack thereof, or national origin. 17 bullets down, just in case you thought there was some form of vice that would be tolerated, a catch-all rule is added: no other unethical conduct. When selecting a home in the Fediverse, a user might end up selecting an instance based off the stated interests of the server, based off the code of conduct and what rules they want to be governed by. People who favor unregulated environments gravitate in one direction, others who want to exist in places with specific rules go in another. In this way, users get to choose what sort of experience they want to have. The Fediverse achieves a flexibility that can't happen in centralized social networks. Where big social media platforms tend to constrain behavior only in limited circumstances, the Fediverse provides protections according to the needs of its users and in highly specific settings. These codes of conduct also change and evolve depending on the needs of their users. In November 2019, Mastodon administrators began seeing a spike of new users from India. Twitter had come under criticism in recent months for twice suspending a prominent lawyer who had argued before the Indian Supreme Court. Sanjay Hegade's account had run afoul of Twitter's automated moderation tools, which had failed to understand the meaning behind his use of a picture of August Landmesser, a German national who had refused to salute Adolf Hitler. Indian users were also critical of how Twitter had distributed blue checks, the icon after a person's username to indicate a verified account. Blue check marks on Twitter have become a matter of caste divide, assertion, and privilege, said Supreme Court lawyer Nitin Meshram. After Hegede publicly migrated to Mastodon, many Indians began to follow suit. The new and distinct user group wanted their Mastodon moderators to behave differently from Twitter, and they campaigned for changes in their instance's rules governing behavior. There was a big push to remove casteism from the Fediverse, which is discrimination based on caste, said Ash Furrow, the administrator of Mastodon.technology. It's not something that I'd ever considered for. It's something that we added to our code of conduct because it's something that our new users need. While social media companies tend to update their policies only after public scrutiny and pressure, codes of conduct on Mastodon appear to evolve more quickly to meet the needs of their community. Emmy Doe, a moderator on social.coop, describes a process by which people highlight concerns, discuss them, and vote on them using an open-source online decision-making tool called Lumio. If we feel like we actually need to write something new into our code of conduct, then we raise that in the community working group in Lumio, and then we raise that to all the members in the general Lumio group. Maf, the administrator of Queer.party, tells me that their server's code of conduct started out as more or less a boilerplate, please don't do crimes, common sense is an important life skill. But as more users signed up and more waves of people shifted to Mastodon, a lot of stuff came up that felt important to actually state, such as their policy around pornographic images. So, codes of conduct appear to address the diversity problem that Mike Masnick highlighted, at least at the instance level. Users are able to join communities that represent their values and are protected by those rules. Human moderation. Conflict emerges in even the most tight-knit communities. In most interactions, interpersonal social skills among users are enough to ensure that the situation is resolved, or at least does not escalate to become a broader problem. But in every interaction, there is a potential for exchanges to become heated, especially when one is interacting in a network made up of communities with differing codes of conduct. In such cases, having a person whose role it is to mediate and address conflict, a moderator, can be essential. Users appreciate having active moderation to help address issues when they arise. Quote, places that have very active moderation like rage.love, friend.camp, stardew.city, monsterpit.net, even places that are larger but have more involved mod team like playvicious.social, will have a quick and often more satisfying response to reports, one user told me. Large social networks appear to have trouble responding swiftly to hateful or violent content. I asked people who monitor hate speech how rapidly social networks responded to the content that they found and reported. Jacqueline LaCroix, who researched hate speech at Peacetech Lab and other places, tells me that it generally took several weeks for Twitter to remove dangerous posts, if they did. I reported accounts that were either blatantly equating racial or ethnic groups with animals or other inhuman characteristics, or advocating violence against certain groups. Most of these were eventually banned from Twitter, but I think it took around 2 to 4 weeks at least. One technologist based in Pakistan who conducts social media monitoring campaigns reflected that we have dismantled many cyber armies on Twitter. We would report material against minorities, violent extremism, dangerous speech. At times, Twitter responded. At times, they didn't. If you ask people on Mastodon about their moderation experience, their reports are generally positive. In a poll I conducted on Mastodon, 42% of the 670-odd respondents said that they had reported something, whether it had been a spam account or hateful content, to their instance's moderator. For those who reported a response, the average upper limit response time for a moderator to address the issue was 21 hours, with some saying they get feedback in an hour, or even in minutes. As a joke, one user reported me to their own instance admin to see how long it would take to respond. Within a minute, the admin had checked in. I pretty much never see things that are outright hateful, due to a combination of network effects and my mods being really proactive about trying to firewall off the kind of spaces that cultivate dickwads, one user, Starcat, told me. The great thing about the mods is that they're community members, so they're embedded in the relevant social context. This means that they're able to act based on subtleties that might be invisible to outsiders. It also means that their curation is very active, because they don't want to deal with dickwads either. It looks like quality of moderation is partly an issue of scale. While the Fediverse is starting to grow large, the average size of an instance in the Fediverse is less than 800, according to Fediverse.space. Based off of my interviews with Mastodon users, scale of the instance is a factor that can impact the quality of the moderation response. Mastodon.social, the flagship Mastodon instance, is maintained by the technology's creator, Eugen Rochko, and has 4 moderators maintaining a community of about 39,000 active users. At a 1 to 9,800 moderator to active user ratio, it's one of the lowest on the Fediverse. Outside of Mastodon.social, the average moderator to active user ratio that I encountered was around 1 to 150. While some users said that their reports to Mastodon.social had been addressed within 24 to 48 hours, others mentioned that they never received feedback on their moderation requests, and one user from friend.camp told me that they found the bigger instances to be unresponsive. The reports I send to larger, louder instances often see no action, said the user. But the smaller, more mindfully cultivated instances respond almost immediately within a day or so. Places like radical.town and mastodon.social, where there are easily 1,000 active members, are basically a black hole for reports. So, the smaller the ratio of moderators to their community, the better response times tend to be. Moderation tools. What about when moderators need to take action? What levers do moderators pull when dealing with content on their instances? Moderators and administrators have a range of options at their disposal, ranging from facilitated discussion to an instance-wide ban. Interestingly, not all moderation tools are the same across platforms, leading to different challenges between different social networks. Discussion. The beginning of most interventions can be as simple as asking people to engage. Emmy Doe explained how she and other moderators on her team try to deal with issues when conflict arises on her server. Most of the things that we are intervening on are people who are concerned about the behavior of people off our instance, not necessarily on our instance. There's a lot of agreement in terms of our community code of conduct. If there's an issue, if we just point to the code of conduct and facilitate a conversation between the person who has raised the issue and the person who perpetrated the issue, people are very open to taking down posts, editing, and engaging in conversation. But I think that's just who we are attracting to our instance. I think the reason people are on our instance might be different from the reasons why they would be on Twitter. Silencing. Moderators also have an ability to silence a user or an instance, meaning that their content will not be seen in timelines unless they are followed by a user. Silencing can be an appropriate tactic if there's a single bad user on a server, but if the bad actor is representative of the server as a whole, it might be worthwhile to take extreme measures. Defederation. Defederation. Moderators and administrators have real power in Mastodon within their domains. It's within the ability of moderators to block individuals from interacting with their users or, if necessary, defederate with the server altogether, preventing any content or users from one site from showing up on their server. In March of 2020, the administrator of Queer.party logged in and discovered that a member of their community had filed a request for moderation. The admin, a person going by the username Maff, was a software security specialist based in Scotland, who had moderated the instance since they founded it in 2017. Since that time, they had seen moderation reports in all the variety that the Fediverse had to offer. So, when they saw a report comment which read, quote, "Reality, the Redskins started fights they couldn't win and paid dearly," they knew that they'd need to do some research in order to choose how best to respond to the message. At first, they assumed that the message might be related to American sports, since they were aware that a team in the US was at the time called the Redskins. But after exploring the context of the post, they soon realized that the reference was not to sports, but to American history, and that the term Redskin was a derogatory term for Native Americans. By itself, the comment might not have caught the attention of the major social media companies. But Queer.party's code of conduct explicitly disallowed racism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, and any other discriminatory conduct which attacks any individual or group of individuals based off what they are or what they believe in. And the post, both the derogatory phrase and the callous justification of violence, fell outside the bounds of acceptable conduct within the instance. Given the content of the message, Maff felt that their role as administrator required an intervention, but the question remained, how to respond? The reported post had come from outside queer.party, so MAF's next step was to check on the code of conduct of the user's instance. If they found that the terms of service of the poster's home instance disallowed this sort of posting, they might be able to initiate a dialogue with the poster. What they found was dismaying. Far from being an ordinary member, the poster in question was on the instance's moderation team. What is more, the server's code of conduct was filled with red flags. Quote, no LGBTQ, no homosexuality, no men who think they're women or women who think they're men, no made-up genders. The instance's rules made it clear that they'd be unsympathetic to MAF raising the issue of the admin's conduct for discussion. Given the diametrically opposed values of the two instances, MAF made the decision to make an instance-wide block. No messages from any of the remote instance's users could now be seen by members of queer.party. And ultimately, it was to be hoped, they would have a better experience on the Fediverse. This example of moderation, which plays out with countless permutations on the Fediverse, illustrates the difference between moderation on a federated social network and in a centralized social media company. It is likely that if a post in this example were reported on Twitter or Facebook, it may not have been processed for some time. And it's also possible that it would not have qualified as hate speech in the terms that the larger platforms would have recognized it. MAF was highly aware of the space they were engaging in and was able to delve into the context surrounding the content, both in terms of the subject matter and the background of the poster. After examining options for intervention, which included everything from dialogue to sentencing or blocking an individual, the administrator was able to take a step to not only respond to an individual user's report, but to proactively protect the community at large. It's important to note that not all moderation tools offer the same protections to their users. In my research, many users independently told me that the video management tool PeerTube often have a hard time maintaining a clean environment for their users. PeerTube administrators have been asking for years to access the tools that Mastodon admins enjoy, such as the ability to block entire instances. PeerTube's developers were aware of this issue, which is why they've raised funds to improve the software's moderation features. The experience of PeerTube users, who have sometimes been confronted with child pornography or pro-Nazi imagery, is evidence that simply decentralizing social media isn't enough. Administrators must be equipped with powerful moderation tools to be able to tend to their communities. So, it's important to emphasize that the structure of decentralized networks doesn't inherently protect them from having bad actors. It just means that these actors are limited in their ability to impact others. But between June 2019 and May 2020, observers of the Fediverse were able to see how the social network responded to Gab, a large and unwelcome instance of bad actors using structures made available to them. The effort to block out Gab and other bad actors plays out in myriad ways. Activists like Lorelei campaigned hard to get web clients to block Gab's domain at the software level. Another user, Yowlin, pressured app repositories like F-Droid to tag Fediverse client apps with promotes bigotry if they didn't hardcode blocks to Gab and similar instances. As a result of public pressure, at least 4 of the major Fediverse clients, Tusky, Toot, Mast, and Amarok, blocked Gab in some fashion. And at the instance level, a vast number of Fediverse communities simply don't associate with Gab or related bad actors. Catgirl, the administrator for LGBTQIA.is, recalled their experience when Gab entered the scene. Quote, I remember when Gab first came out. I checked it out, and immediately you had one of the guys saying to shove Jews back into a train. That goes beyond a freedom of speech server. It's more of a freedom to incite violence server. When I asked whether Gab was an isolated instance, they replied, no one wants to federate with them. It's a circle jerk of people spreading hate. Ash Furrow explained his decision not only to defederate his server from Gab, but even from instances that federate with Gab. Setting up 2 degrees of separation from Gab is a rare step, but Furrow sees it as a necessary step, since through them, negative content might seep into the instance he maintains. It's either the case that they agree and they're like, oh wow, I don't want to be associated with this at all, or they see it in a sort of free speech absolutionist terms. And, I can kind of see where they're coming from. And listen, I'm Canadian, I'm not really a very vocal person, I don't like confrontation, but I'll tell them, is federating with Gab more important than federating with Mastodon.technology? It's a decision that I put in their field. Through these dynamics, communities of communities have formed within the Fediverse through different codes of conduct and different definitions for acceptable speech. Instances like rage.love, stardew.city, and social.linux.pizza publicize lengthy block lists detailing servers that they don't federate with or whose users they silence. Instances with lengthy codes of conduct can end up with weak ties or no ties to instances with relatively few restrictions. Quote, islands are forming, more or less connected, and that's okay. Arteteko, a moderator on Kodo.org, told me, describing how his instance, which places relatively few restrictions on user behavior, has ended up being blocked by many servers. The effect has been even more pronounced with Gab. Gab is at the center of one of those islands in the Fediverse, disconnected from the broader whole. Almost 1 year after it had joined the Fediverse, Gab's CTO, Rob Colbert, took to the platform to announce the instance was packing up its bags. In his post, he expressed frustration with Gab's isolation, that, quote, the implementation will change and we won't be compatible with this Fediverse. Truth be told, and this data is public, Gab is 99.3% insular. 0.7% of people on Gab mention someone who isn't on Gab. So Gab is wasting resources importing bags of shit no one reads, so that 0.7% of the community can, occasionally, mention someone off-site. It's unclear what the defederation timeline is or what form the site will take, but it is clear that isolation has impacted the network's plans and has dimmed their prospects for finding a broader community in a decentralized social network. The Fediverse has rejected Gab. I tracked Lorelei down and asked her how she felt about the way that Mastodon and the broader Fediverse had adapted to bad actors. I was disappointed to learn that she wasn't happy. She felt that Mastodon had failed to take some steps that would make users safer, making federation between servers a mutual act, changing the way that block rules function. After Gab had first arrived, she packed up and migrated to a new server and installed custom modifications to improve the safety of her users. She doesn't think that the Fediverse will exist long term. And yet, it means something that Lorelei is still there, occupying a corner of the decentralized social network. Decentralization and open protocols make it possible for people to build communities they want according to the terms that they desire, and human moderators, context-aware, embedded in the communities that they serve, make these spaces safer and more reflective of their users' values. The world of big, centralized social media has something to learn from the Fediverse. Perhaps it will follow suit.